Good day, my name is Isaiah Orlin. I am the founder of Higher Frequencies, an entrepreneur, executive, lawyer, physical fitness enthusiast, and a seeker of enlightenment and higher frequencies. Higher Frequencies is a community platform based on the pillars of spiritual enlightenment, wellness, music, and travel. Our mantra, discipline our senses to purify our mind, body, and soul through our spiritual practice, physical fitness routine, nutritional behavior, and relationship with self and others, hopes to provide guidance in our community's quest to reach higher frequencies and move closer and closer to spiritual enlightenment, understanding we are all one collective energy. Each episode, we will bring you thought leaders from various sectors of business, nutrition, physical fitness, and spirituality to discuss their stories and the modalities of discipline they use to lean in and reach higher frequencies. Today's topic, making artificial intelligence our ally rather than our detriment. Robert and I met years ago at LVS, where we both worked, Las Vegas Sands. Robert's a visionary leader with over 30 years of experience in corporate and entrepreneurial ventures. He holds a Ph.D. in the research of consumer behavior and human learning and data sciences, as well as an MBA. He has a proven track record of successful business ventures in disruptive technology. Robert is an agent of change and a disruptive innovation catalyst and leads the Blackfire Innovation Hub and UNLV Hughes Center Incubator, driving change through cutting-edge problem-solving, ideation, commercialization with a team of students, faculties, and partners to bring new ideas to life, leading state-of-the-art research facility at the forefront of advanced technology development, unleashing the potential for economic growth and diversity. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Isaiah, and thank you for letting me be on your very first podcast episode. It's quite an honor. I think we've done a lot of first things together.
We can get into that in a good way. A lot of breaking business barriers at LVS and knocking down walls, everything from e-gaming to selling live room product on Home Shopping Network. In the same day. So let's get in. You've had a very stoic career. So let's give the audience a little overview before we get into the topic of AI, maybe starting with your time as a fighter pilot.
Oh my, well, that goes back decades, but it was the very first career I had after my undergraduate degree. And I started that, actually, I come from a long line of military family. My dad was in World War II, two brothers in Vietnam, both came back. And my ancestors, going back as far as we can track, past the Civil War to the Revolutionary War, all served in the American military. So it seemed like something I should do, but I never planned to do it. I was coming out of college and the US was in a recession. So the job market shrunk away to nothing. And I walked through the student union one day and there's two Navy pilots standing there in their dress whites with a scrapbook. And I'm like, what are you selling? And they're going like, Thailand.
Sounds good.
I'm like, I'm in. What do I have to do? That one thing led to another and ended up going through flight training. I was accepted, of course, going through flight training. And I served for 9 years as a pilot in the Navy. Quite an interesting period for a young man, right? I just graduated college. No real ties, and they allow me to travel the world and experience that along with, the technical aspects of being a pilot and being a part of a squadron. It's an extraordinary period in my life, especially at that age.
Amazing. It seems that from what I know of you, there's an emotional IQ to your career from where you went from that part into consumer behavior and even weaving your idea for Buddhism in there as well. Can you speak a little to that storied career, how you got into the consumer behavior sector and how it led to Las Vegas?
Yeah. And I think if I reflect on my life, there's always a lot of like pivoting points, right? Where I make a decision. What am I going to do next? Sometimes there's a thought to it. There's, a goal. Sometimes it's reacting to the circumstances that present themselves to me in that moment, which is a very Buddhist way of thinking, right? I didn't know it at the time, but it was. And so, I've kind of lived my life with not necessarily doing what whoever they are, think I should do, but rather what I feel I should do, where I'm being drawn, what I'm being directed to. And a perfect example is the transition from Navy pilot to the private sector. The typical exit path at that time for a pilot, and still is today, is to become an airline pilot, right? And I had actually taken those first steps. I was interviewing with United Airlines and American Airlines, but it looked to me like that wasn't the same flying lifestyle that I had with the Navy. It was a job and it paid pretty decently, but it wasn't the same, right? Aircraft are obviously radically different. So I was a little hesitant about it, you know? And I came across a gentleman. I was at an event and I started talking to this gentleman who worked for Westin Hotels. And he was a veteran. He had retired and exited the military and gone into hospitality. He wasn't a pilot, though. He was, I think, public affairs officer. And he said, you know, why don't you think about coming to work for us? You're mature. You're obviously very good at decision making, very level-headed. We could use someone like you to help diversify our team. You bring something to the table that we don't presently have. My answer to him was, I don't know anything about the hotel business. And his response to me was, it's not like flying planes. We could teach you. So I looked at it, went in and interviewed, and they made me an offer. And I said, well, I'm going to try it because I can always fall back on United Airlines if it doesn't work out. And that's launched a career that 25 years later converged us at Venetian Palazzo.
I think that was awesome. Thanks for sharing. I think you hit on something that the higher frequencies audience and myself really lean into, right? And that's the pivot, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to be an entrepreneur and you're going to search for spirituality, you have to meet life where it's at. And people get so caught up on what I would call the table of contents they're given when they're born and just filling it in, that they don't allow themselves time for the pivot. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, I agree. And I think some of that extends from the environments that we're in, right? This is what you're supposed to do. Here's the next chapter in your life. When you finish your having fun as a Navy pilot, you're supposed to become an airline pilot. Instead of just saying, it's a moment to pivot my life, where should I go? What are the opportunities that are opening in front of me? And maybe I pursue one that I actually knew nothing about. I think that's a very entrepreneurial spirit, right? I'm not really sure. There's a lot of unknowns, but I'm going to try it. I'm going to give it a shot and see what happens.
I think, and we're going to get to the AI thing, but I think we hit on something here with the Buddhist mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I study Hinduism and Judaism, but when they talk about suffering, I feel it's more about the aspect of being willing to suffer through a new experience to learn versus the idea of being in pain.
Yeah, a bit. I think from my perspective, the Buddhist perspective on it is you just accept what it is, right? It's just a decision and make it, and then the next minute accept that, right? And not worry too much. We all have to, of course, pay our rent and things like that. Not dwell too much on what the next year holds, or is this the right career for me, or is my startup going to succeed, or is it going to fail? But rather saying, okay, you're making this decision now, live this next moment, right? And concentrate everything into the now. You and me talking right now.
Right. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So let's look at how this applies with AI, artificial intelligence, business. And it does because, we're moving into an age where the human capital, the human thought process, the aspect of community and purpose is changing on a daily basis. And a lot of that has to do with AI. So before we get to that though, let's just give the audience an overview on Blackfire, because the students are really in the third version of a digital human being with these students. So let's talk a bit about Blackfire and give the audience an overview of that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's one of my favorite things. And I think one of the things I am most impressed with that have happened in my life is Blackfire. What Blackfire represents is a different form of higher education. We typically think of higher education, UNLV, where I work, as an institute where you go and you take courses and you earn a degree. And maybe you leave and go to the private sector, or you stay and get another degree, right? And that's our traditional definition of higher education. I think Stanford and MIT disrupted that. They began to say, well, what about the students who are entrepreneurs, right? What if they see a different path than that? Do we have any support system to help them, right? To nurture that thinking, to nurture that idea of a company and make it go forward. And that took off, obviously, to enormous success at Duke, the typicals. And so a few years ago, I started at UNLV. And one of the things that I saw with other faculty, actually, was that there's this growing trend of entrepreneurialism in students, right? 20 years ago, you'd say, you're going to go to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, study engineering, and then you're going to graduate and get a job with an engineering company. That's what 99% would do. 1% would stay and get a master's, right? Well, now that changed. Now it's like, yeah, most are still going to do that, and some are still going to stay and get another degree. But there's a few who say, I want to do my own thing. I want to try this. This is an idea I had while I was working in this materials class or my senior design project, and I think we could really do something with this. And the universities in the past never had anything to do with them other than shake their hand and say, yeah, good luck with that. Here's your diploma. Well, now we do, and Blackfire represents that. It represents that kind of next step. What do you do first? If you have an idea and you've come up with something, let's say we'll use an engineering student as an example because it's an easy one to understand. And you've come up with a clever device. What do you do? How do you commercialize that? How do you turn that into a business or a career for yourself? Well, there are certain things you need. You need a business model. You know this. You're an entrepreneur. You need funding. You need understanding of your market. You need a go-to-market strategy, a product roadmap, all of those things. But if you're that engineering student, you didn't have any of those business classes. So you're sitting there going, gee, how do I do? I don't know anything about business models. I don't think, what do you mean funding? Like, don't I just go to the bank and get a loan? They're like, yeah, no, they're not going to loan you any money. B, that's not how that works. So we built Blackfire as this place where that can happen, where we can take an entrepreneurially minded student or students, a team, and help them create the business model, understand the market. Is there a demand for that product? How do you raise funds? How do you operate a company? How do you create a product roadmap? And then help them actually do it, either through laboratory simulations or prototype development. And we do that because one of the unique things about these facilities like Blackfire is the support they get from the tech world. So this is possible, but it's much slower when you don't have their involvement. And when I say involvement, I'm talking about big tech, companies like LG Electronics, Panasonic, gaming companies like Caesars Entertainment, Boyd Gaming, technology or game actually companies and robotics companies. All of them are working together to create an ecosystem where entrepreneurs can thrive, where they can develop an idea and take it to market. So that's what Blackfire represents. It represents an environment where those things happen.
So I think to summarize, it's an extremely important exercise, not an exercise, but an entity, because for myself, I've been blessed with mentors that have built industries, but I also show up in certain places and things happen because of they do, right? But that doesn't negate the fact of what you really hit on, right? How do you build a business, right? How do you understand the brand humanization? How do you understand the supply chain management, the legal, the financial, the accounting, the sales, channels, the marketing channels, and more importantly, how do those interact and how does the decision process get affected in which way you pivot based on your financials, right?
Yeah.
And maybe this is somewhere where AI actually can come in because it can possibly look for solutions and present solutions with inputs that per se the human would not, right? It might not be able to originate the idea, and that's what I'd like to get in here is, really can AI be a creator versus more, something that assists in driving you, sort of how your leadership skills was, assist the person in driving them into the decision that's best for all parties to the experience.
Well, thanks for saying that about me. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that, that there is a role. I don't think we're there today, but I think it will evolve and the applications will develop and the models will get better. But they can. And the example, as you were talking, that I thought of in my head is, let's go back to our engineering entrepreneur who has a new product, a new device, and they want to turn it into a company. I think what AI can do for that particular group is almost act like that founder they don't have, right? What do I need to do for a business model? Okay, here's an outline for a business model based on my research on 10 million startups.
Correct.
Right? So that's where I think, at a very surface level, the AI can fill in the gaps in the skill set that those entrepreneurs lack. And in listening to startup pitches over the last, oh my gosh, almost decade now, one of the things that always strikes me as the most common weakness in startups that I listen to is founder kind of, the breadth
Pie
of
in the sky
founders.
thought.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you've got that, but you don't have this grounded person.
Where does the rubber
here.
meet the road?
Where's this person? You need them on your team because it's highly unlikely that you'll succeed unless you have this other thinker. And maybe it could fill in some of that, and help them to understand, here's what you don't know. And we can help you kind of de-risk your idea a bit by adding a sounder business basis to it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. So just, we'll pretend for a minute that not everyone's so in depth with AI, right? So artificial intelligence leading the way. I mean, credit card companies, travel companies have been using this for years to segment customers. Most recently, NVIDIA, worth $3.34 trillion, overtook the market last week, Microsoft and Apple. Apple made announcements about their AI. It's everywhere, right? So we're going to segment, the conversation. I took a little definition from online. It said, AI refers to the ability of machines to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence in ways such as learning the patterns in the data and applying that to the new data without being explicitly programmed. It's a big breath, but it sort of sets it up, right? And the way I'd like to segment our conversation is because you and we're similar in that we like two things. On one side of the spectrum, we like business. Mm-hmm. And on the other side of the spectrum, we like wellness. And we've both been through our own wellness journeys. And when we speak of wellness, I'm speaking of, spirituality, nutrition, physical fitness, mind, body, and soul, and how we heal that. And that'll be the second part. We'll get into that. But let's dive into the business aspect and really, we're in Las Vegas, and I feel Las Vegas is going to become the city of the future in terms of how it interacts with sports and entertainment, travel, music, it's all here. And we're in proximity to all these great national treasures as well. So we're really primed for something special. But ultimately, travel is our business, right? And I'd love to get into the conversation of AI as it relates to that and how you really see it affecting consumer behavior and also consumer monitoring.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you touched on some of it, first of all. AI is an advanced level of machine learning. And if you take large data sets and you allow machine learning to extract insights out of it, the next question begs, what do you do with the insight, right? And that's where AI steps in. It's just, let's do something with it. Let's look at another data set and see if it has the same or predict its outcomes. And so I think you look at a model of an economy like Las Vegas, and I agree with you, it's a tourism-based, kind of a fun-based entertainment, but there's more to it. There's data science here, right? There are predictive analytics here in droves in these casinos and in the design of those games, right? In the mathematics that those games run on. So you have an ecosystem that is rich with the opportunities for the application of AI.
Various people from various socioeconomic backgrounds are coming here with two different modalities, right? We have what we call the FIT, the free independent traveler that's here to hang out. And then we have the business traveler for trade shows, conventions, business, not to mention a cross section of the globe of 43 plus million people coming through here a year. I don't really think there's any place in the world like it.
Not where it's at this scale and this concentrated. I think that's the unique nature of this market is it's at a massive scale and it's highly concentrated. I mean, it's all within about a 6-mile radius.
Correct.
90% of it is. So you have this opportunity for the application of AI to reach all those different verticals I talked about within a very confined area, and you've got a large sample set. You'd be able to prove it very quickly if your predictions are spot on and if it's working as you suspect it will.
And from a marketing perspective, to market to these consumers, speak to how powerful if you're really using AI and tracking your consumers. And we've worked on customer loyalty programs and all sorts of strategic partnerships with Fortune 500 brands. And for me, when I was working with you, it was always like, I don't care about the cash on the table. How do I grab that person and reuse that create the conversation, right? Because the brand becomes a human because of social media. How does AI affect that?
I think it takes it to an entirely different paradigm. And here's what I mean by that. When we work together, you're right. I was always challenging the teams. How do we do this? Don't tell me about the economics. Tell me about everything else, the behavior, the actions. And the best we could do at that time was to put the guests into buckets. The buckets you described, right? Frequent travelers, business travelers, entertainment, foodies, et cetera. Whatever the buckets were, that's as close as we could get to them. We couldn't get to that's Isaiah. We just got as close no, that's people who like to travel for these specific reasons. What AI enables us to do at scale is to market to you, an individual. And forget about loyalty, tiers, and all of that, because I can create one that matters just to each individual person. That degree of hyper-personalization, I think, is one of the first outcomes and outputs of AI that can find a place at scale here in Las Vegas. The idea that I can market to an individual, not to their tier on their loyalty card, not to their credit card, nothing like that. I can market to Robert. I know what Robert likes, and I'm going to speak to him like that. What happens to the loyalty paradigm when that's happening? It explodes,
There's
right?
hyper-personalization.
It is loyalty, right? Because it's you and me, right? Yeah. So even though you're a machine, not you personally,
maybe.
I hope not anyway. But you get you form a loyalty with it, right? You're like, it understands me, or like Tom Cruise, it gets me, right? Or I don't think that's a direct quote, but something like that. It gets me. It understood me, and maybe it did it in my language. What if I'm Korean and I come into this market and English is not my second language? It's like number 3 or 4. All right, well, most of the stuff here I can't read. All of the employees speak English. But wait a minute. This AI is talking to me in my dialect of Korean, translating everything I see and everything I hear instantly.
And grammatically correct.
That's
a big kicker.
And contextually correct.
Contextually and grammatically correct.
So now what happens? I think that's where I said we shift the whole loyalty issue to a different paradigm. It's about the individual now, not about groups of individuals.
It's interesting you say that. I was at Fontainebleau the other night, and I was in the carport, and there was a group from, I believe they were from China, and their Uber was in Chinese, but they could not, I was trying to help them, but it was extremely difficult to find how to get them the right directional, right?
Yeah.
So I think those moments of disassociation, they can be very frustrating. I mean, the wayfinding on the property can be very frustrating. These are cities, so AI presents a whole new aspect, and that's just in one aspect. I like to, dig into the idea of also the emotional IQ and the biomapping of the computer, of the people, even with the games, and where you might see that going if, you bring in a test group to test out these, an IGT game now, and they're wearing the Aura Ring, or they're wearing a headset, and it's actually, you can actually see how their brain waves are reacting to these impulses that we understand whether it's sports, entertainment, music, the goal is to drive an emotional reaction in gaming as well. But we've never been able to actually look at that.
No, we haven't. And it could be a wearable. It could be emotion recognition by the machine, right? And it doesn't always have to be for the dopamine rush effect, right? It doesn't always have to be to make you happy and make you play more or make you come back and see another show. Sometimes it could be let's say someone has an issue with gambling, right? It could be recognizing the stress in their face. And maybe it's an intervention of maybe you should take some time off. Here's a certificate to go to the buffet, right? So I think there are all sorts of applications that could happen when we start understanding the human body and how it's reacting to different things. And again, it's like I said before, but doing it at scale for everybody.
Correct. I mean, and it just doesn't have to be, and that's the dichotomy between the spiritual side, right? Eventually, we'll get back into the discipline statement, but the goal is to be able to turn within and have those dopamine hits but external factors, we're humans and we're enjoying ourselves,
Yes.
right? But it might not be the dopamine hit of the gaming. It might be, okay, what music is playing in the casino during these days, and let's not take a crapshoot with how we're going to emotionally charge people, no pun intended, right?
Yeah.
But it's a big, how we wafted the fragrances in the air, the music playing. I don't think people who aren't in the integrated resort business understand the level of detail into all of that, and how a lot of it is really just guessing and seeing how consumers react.
Well, it's because they don't have any platform to do anything with it, right? It's like, okay, so we know sound plays heavily on emotion. We know scent has an effect on emotion. But when you're dealing with 10,000 people in the building at the same time, how do you do anything with that information, right? It's hard because, first of all, you can't process it at that level, at that degree of granularity. So I think by being able to do that, now you can take those insights that you're gaining and put them into action. You can change those things that affect human emotion. Color being a great one. I was talking to a friend a few years ago they opened an addition to their conference center, and it was a big addition. And he was talking to me about these large LED screens that they had inside the conference center. And he's like, what do you think we should do with these, Robert? And this was kind of pre the hype around AI. It was still just something in university laboratories at that point. And I was like, why don't you look into projecting different colors on those screens? And he looked at me like, why? And I go, well, color has an effect on emotion, and you can very easily find some research studies that tell you what kind of colors convey which emotions. And I said, so for example, if it's, a conference of, a high stress conference like a sales meeting, in the morning, maybe you want to project a softer color up there. Maybe you want violets on those screens and blues, do it with florals or something else, not just putting ads up there, but putting up there that has a beneficial effect to the attendees. And he looked at me and kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, well, I'm just helping you brainstorm. But there is science behind, as we know, behind these things and how they affect us. So now we can actually measure them, right? With AI and inputs and auras and other wearables, we could understand how they're affecting that audience, and we could change it on the fly.
I think that was a wonderful point. It also made me think how, due to AI and due to this technology, spirituality is finally meeting science. So it's not in this foo-foo, even though all of us who have studied these ancient dialects know about the chakra system and the nadis, and we know where energy, the fact that now you can look at it on a computer scene and see your actual energy shift, you can see how your body reacts, how you constrict. I mean, it seems to open a world of possibilities for healing.
Yeah, I think that's clearly a path that has been, I liked what you just said, how it brought the two together, right? And it's brought together through the science, right? The science is enabling us to unlock some of those mysteries that are happening at a quantum level that before were theoretical or spiritual. And now the theory is, well, they're connected, and let's figure out how, because we now have the processing to do that.
So I was also reading a bit on the World Travel and Tourism Council, and they just published some papers on their series of AI, and they stated that it's going to reshape the future of travel and tourism. But that there's ethical governance concerns and risks to it as well, right?
Yes.
Maybe we should get into that, like the ethical side a bit, maybe. What can you see? At the end of the day, if we look at it in a business standpoint, we are talking about the manipulation of people's energy, and we're selling things at the end of the day, whether that's tickets to a sporting event, or whether that's a poker game, whatever it may be. And there's no judgment because all of that brings joy to people in some fashion until you become addicted to anything, whether it's coffee or anything else, right? How do you ethically put the bumpers up with AI and not let it become something that is the uncontrollable digital beast?
That's probably the question for the next 20 years is how do you do that and who does it, right? Ultimately, you look at AI, these are entrepreneurially funded private ventures. The theory of AI was born in universities, as many great theories happen. Researchers say, we can figure this out. We know how the brain works. How can we apply that to computing? Okay, the theory came there, but all the money today and the investment is flowing into private companies. I know they're public, but we'll call them private sector.
They're private, and ultimately, look, we see that, that's not on this podcast, but we'll get into this in later podcasts, but with respects to food and the drug industry, we see a lot of these companies lobbying for what is not for the greatest good of people.
Yeah, and that's not their mission, remember. Their mission is return to shareholders.
Correct.
And that comes into conflict. I'm not saying they do unethical things, but it comes into conflict. If you're presented with an ethical choice or what your fiduciary responsibility is to shareholders, that creates a conflict. And who prevails in that? Society says ethical decision prevails. Private sector shareholders say, no, that's important, but we prevail. This is our capital. So ultimately, you have to have some mediator, right, who says, here are the guardrails. I like that term that you're using. Here are the guardrails. Here are some of the things we have to watch out for and be cognizant of, as privacy laws do in, for example, the European Union with social media. They're intervening to protect your privacy. Correct. Otherwise, the private sector says, yeah, we're protecting it, but we're also creating return to our shareholders.
Yeah, and I think that it's not a cut and dry answer, right? Because we see this between the interplay between private and public. And look, we all want to achieve. I didn't grow up with money. I've come into some. I've worked. I've had great success. But how much is enough is the question at the end of the day. And I think that's what we're really struggling with as a society, right? Really the question of how much is enough and really community and purpose, right? Yeah. So that's the other question I guess I have with respects to the business, right? There's going to be a delineation in old jobs due to AI that no longer exist. And that's a tough pill to swallow. There's no more horse and buggies on the road anymore, right? Because cars came about, right? And people don't really understand this, right? Because this is probably one of the most dynamic shifts in human capital in history. Mm-hmm. Speak to that. I mean, what are the students saying? What does the new job look like market with respects to that?
So first of all, I think that it is a phenomenon that occurs with every era of new technology. Every time a technology emerges onto the scene that is going to scale and have a significant impact, you see this trade-off happening in human capital. We saw it with the advent of digital computers, right? With the smartphone, with machine learning. All of these things have an effect, and we'll see it with AI, of course, as you mentioned. We'll see it with robotics, et cetera. So that's going to happen. And in fact, it was, I'll think his name here in a second, the researcher in the 1920s who first started discussing the idea of creative destruction. That if you destroy this entity, that capital is freed to go somewhere else. Now, let's get back to the second part of your question about students. What are they thinking about it? So I've had a number of student entrepreneurs who are working in this area. One in particular, one of the students I had on, I remember him very clearly. He worked, as many UNLV students do, worked on the Strip. And he was a concierge at the MGM Grand. And his idea was, he was trying to understand how does he increase the effectiveness of a concierge. So I asked him a few simple questions. How many rooms are in the MGM Grand? It's over 5,000, right? How many concierge are on duty when you're at 100%?
I'd say less than 20.
Yeah, it's far less than 20. So then we went deeper, and I'm like, what is your typical interaction with a guest, and how long does it last? And he had to think about it, and then he came back a few days later, and he's just like, well, about 5 to 10 minutes. Most often what they want are restaurant recommendations. right? So they're here for a convention and they're taking their clients out to dinner to close a deal, and they need a great restaurant to impress the client, and it has to be quiet because they're talking business. So I said, well, that's really interesting. What do you do? And he says, well, I start talking to them and they let me know this. And I think of all the places we could send them. And I'll say, well, you should go to Robuchon. It's a great French restaurant. You'll impress the heck out of your clients. And it's quiet. Now, he says the contrast with that is to send them to like Wolfgang Puck or Tao at Venetian, which are beautiful restaurants, great food, but they're loud.
But without the AI technology and without the information on that client, he doesn't know what their socioeconomic background is. And you're describing extremely wildly different price options.
Exactly.
As well as like a client that wants to be in a more ruckus environment and a client that wants to have a wine pairing dinner.
Exactly. So you see, where we eventually got with him was he realized the goal was not to create a digital concierge. The goal was actually to offload the very mundane tasks that the concierge do, give someone directions to the restroom.
Correct.
And allow that human capital to spend time saying, tell me about your business dinner. Tell me about your anniversary. What kind of food do you like? And then using creativity and abstract thinking to create solutions. While the AI was handling the 10,001 questions about where's the men's room, where do I find the poker room, et cetera, that take a few seconds but are relatively straightforward. But by doing that, the capital is his time. His time was freed up to pursue more creative outputs.
I guess my concern or thought process, as you have this, as I mentioned, they're the third generation of digital students, right? I was a digital analog student. But they're so used to the phone that there's going to be a point where it can ask me, the AI for the property should be able to ask me 4 questions about what I need from my dinner and present the correct options.
Actually, I'll go one step further. It doesn't need to ask you. It already knows.
It should know from my behaviors.
It already knows.
Right.
Already knows. And before you came to Las Vegas, said, okay, here are the options for the business dinner that you're going to have or the anniversary dinner.
And give a blurb on each
one. And by the way, I'm holding reservations in all 3.
Wild. Wild. I mean, it's, you know, there's, look, just like we were talking about this in a business I'm working on, unless you've worked in an integrative resort, you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Like,
that's very true statement.
So computers, in my opinion, can never replace what goes on these properties completely because it's, they're living organisms at best.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. All right. Let's dive into like the areas. So we got into the AI and business, and there's so much more to talk about with that stuff as it comes to consumer behavior. But we touched on it with regard to consumer behavior with the biomapping. But I want to talk a little more about like the wellness aspect of things with you. I know you're an avid yogi, Buddhist. You've seen me at my heaviest and have seen me in my transformation, which has been a result of things such as plant medicine and regenerative medicine and stem cells and all this stuff that they're buzzwords, but they do work. So really medicine 3.0, and you hit on it also with the concierge right now, right? Because it's like the current medicine field, like the doctors shuffle through you, and really AI gives us the power to put wellness back into our own hands. That's what I believe. So it's looking at biomarkers and health span, right? Keeping away from those 4 horsemen, you know, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, cardiovascular disease, these foundational diseases that lead you down this road. I know the students are focused more on the business side of things, but are these conversations they're having as well, how the technology is used in the wellness sector?
Well, yes, they are. And the reason is not because we purposefully focus them in that area. It just organically happens.
Do you think that's because of the sports in town?
I don't think so. It started well before the Golden Knights appeared on the scene, and that was a discussion. I think it has more to do with there are factors that change across generations. That's a cohort theory that a lot of research social scientists look at. And generations are different. Right? And some of those factors that cause that differences are things like you talked about, digital natives. If you grow up in a world with always having the internet, you don't know what it's like to not have it. except
Correct.
when you lose your signal, then you get frustrated.
Correct.
But you don't understand that world. So it has an effect on your generation, on how they view things, right? And access to information. It's always at my fingertips, right? As opposed to a baby boomer, it's like, it's still novel, right? Yeah, oh, this is cool. I can actually find this while I'm sitting in the, in an airplane. But back to where I was going with this, I think there's an opportunity that the students see across the board. There's less of a kind of a siloed approach at business, that business includes, your spiritual aspects and your enjoyment, your pleasure aspects, not just having a job.
Correct.
Right? In fact, there's a research study I just looked at that looked at some of the changing behavior patterns in Gen Z when you're hiring them. And one of the things that was most important to younger people when they're coming into the workforce are the people they work with, not the boss. That was way down on the list. At the top was the people they work with, how they get along with them, how they feel about them. I mean, those are touching on spirituality areas, right? How do you interact with people? And how do you feel and care about other people?
The energy I'm around is the energy I become.
Exactly. And to that generation, they're saying this is pretty significant departure from prior generations. It's really important. So it seems like that could be one of the drivers, that we have a generation that cares more about more diverse things, right? And it doesn't matter if my degree is in engineering, my best friend's over here in accounting, this friend here is an entrepreneur. We all care about each other and we're going to, make it work. So that could have something to play with it, this idea that there's not these strict boundaries anymore.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think, what I'm hearing is that there's more of a life view to the students that are coming through the university now, right?
There is.
And really not only a life view, but how can the university not be a university and actually transition that person into a happy life, right?
Yeah.
Versus like, my generation was sold on get a watch, get a nice car, and like, this is going to give you happiness. The dopamine hits we spoke of, right?
Yeah.
That's what life was about, acquire, and as you acquire, you'll get additional dopamine hits versus the idea of spirituality and saying that everything I have is within me, everything else is gravy, right? How do you see that with the students in their balance and possibly like, is there any SaaS technology that you've seen them working on that, or not really
not yet
that they're using? No.
It's still a little too early.
Okay.
There's obviously the transition to a technology environment dominated by AI is underway,
Correct.
But we're not there yet.
Got you.
So, with the exception of them accessing AI, which becomes more diverse every day and specialized, I don't think so. I think we will see in the short term the development of that integration with that spiritual self of them, the life, how they live their lives, et cetera.
Does the university, look, we're seeing a lot of dissonance in the globe right now, including in the universities here in the US, and a lot of it has to do with where they're pulling their information from and not having, the checks and balances. And one can make an argument that the newspapers in the 60s and 70s and 80s were feeding us what they wanted to anyway, right?
Right.
But there's clearly a mental health epidemic going on with our students.
Yeah.
Is that something that you feel technology and AI might be able to assist and address?
I think, yes, I do. But I think they are self-correcting as well. And I'll tell you how. There is not the same research I was referring to earlier talks about how this younger generation is much better at understanding the information they're digesting than we are. We are the ones who were influenced heavily by misinformation, disinformation, or partially true information that we interpreted to suit our beliefs. We have a generation now that knows that. They're well aware of that. They're well aware of how information is used in a biased way to try and shape.
It's weaponized.
Yeah, weaponized or shape an information. So I think what we'll see, and I know of some companies that are working in that area, is the use of AI to help them do that, right? To help them understand that what you just saw in that 30-second clip is 2% true and 98% false or exaggeration.
Oh, so talk to that a little bit, because in your office we spoke about false positives a bit, and I don't think it's a lot of people are using AI. They're using ChatGPT, and we've seen it in the legal field where the false positives have actually gotten people into trouble.
Yeah.
Talk about, define for me what you believe a false positive it is, and how someone who's using AI in their daily behavior, whether it be work or personal, might be on the lookout for that when they're leading into it.
So there's a couple of ways that immediately come to mind. One is the example I gave you while we were sitting in my office talking about it. And I was doing a research project, and I used the AI to find some research papers. I normally do that on my own, but it was a test. Let's see how it does. And I said I wanted the 3 most highly cited research papers on the topic of endemic advertising. That was the topic. And find those research papers. And it brought back what looked like 3 perfect papers published in peer-reviewed journals by well-known authors. I looked up the authors. Okay, so that's a faculty member at Michigan State, I think it was. But the papers never existed. They were hallucinations.
How is that possible?
The way AI works, it's a predictive algorithm based on statistics. It's not a fact finder. It is trying to predict, in the sequence of words that you gave me, what would be the most likely answer to what you just asked me. And if it can't correlate that with real data, it still has to answer your question. And so that's called the hallucination. It made something up. It didn't do it with ill intent. It's trying to answer my prompt. And all 3, in the example I gave you, all 3 of the papers that were cited were hallucinations. None of them existed.
That's wild.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And it goes back to the idea of the subconscious, and when you talk about now psychedelic medicine and all this stuff, because people have an idea of what the word hallucination means, right? Except here, there's really you have a hallucination in a psychedelic experience. It's diving into the sub-psyche and working through some traumas. Here, you might be relying on it for a court case or something, and that's extremely problematic.
It is extremely. And let's say it's court, medical, all of those things. What if it's hallucinating? What if the answer is incorrect or invalid or made up? That's a problem, right?
Where does the danger then lie of that when a doctor is leaning into it in medicine? So there's 2 types of medicine we're moving into, right? I want to see us move into turning back and seeing that there's a lot of natural things out there, and we can be preventative care and medicine 3.0, understanding and so AI is great for that.
I agree.
Understanding what biomarkers, and really look into biomarkers rather than you go to the doctor now, you get a blood test, and they use the same biomarkers for everybody and don't realize, I'm reading Good Energy now by Casey Means and trying to digest what's in that book, but she goes into all of these biomarkers and how they're misused, right? Mm-hmm. But let's flip, and so that's great for AI because it can digest the information and give us what foods we should eat and all of these great things, that behaviors we can adjust to in terms of our physical fitness, right? But what about now the doctor who's doing their rounds in the cardiology department and leaning into AI and not knowing if there's false positives?
Well, he should. She should. She should be like me. I'm not an MD, I'm Ph.D., but I challenged it. I used critical thinking to say, that sounds odd.
Correct.
Or sounds great, but I'm just going to verify it myself, right? Using an old-fashioned database search to look for that article, and then I'm going to read the article because I want to see if it's consistent with what I was looking for. And when I did the search, I realized it was a hallucinated article. I actually went back to the AI platform, and my next prompt was, these citations appear to be hallucinations.
And what did it respond to you as?
My apologies. Let me research them again. And you know what it came back with?
Same ones.
Same ones.
It's like a comedy sketch from SNL.
It's like, no, that's the same one. You just changed the order.
Right. That's wild.
So anyway, I think it's, I'm sorry about that. It's probably the critical thinking, right? We're, as human beings, as entities, our brains are incredibly good at critical thinking if we allow them to be. And that MD is trained that way and needs to do it then. So even though the AI may be a powerful diagnostic tool and help you to understand what those biomarkers mean for this person, you still have to apply critical thinking to the outputs that you're getting. Say, yeah, does that sound right to me? Does my 25 years of being a cardiologist agree with this AI?
The disconnect. Yeah. I think that brings us, to round out the conversation a bit, the idea of the creator, right? So two ideas of the creator being the divine source and energy, right?
Yeah.
Whether you call that God, witness consciousness, Hashem, Shiva, all of the major philosophies and faiths sort of talk about the divinity, right?
Yeah.
And then the creator being ourself, right?
Yeah.
Because we are that divinity, right? So how can AI ever replace that? Because it cannot connect to that divine energy.
Certainly not in the span of my lifetime.
Gotcha.
I listened to, a few years ago, we had a great speaker series at UNLV, and we had Dr. Michio Kaku, the astrophysicist, was there. And he was talking at that time, this was, I think, the year before pandemic. And he was talking about AI because it was just on his horizon, right? And he said, today, it's about the intelligence of your dog. It can think, it can react, it knows commands, and this was years ago. So in my lifetime, is it going to be able to be that abstract creativity? Is it going to have that element in it? I don't think so. First of all, it's our creation. Humans created AI. Been researching it since the 1940s. It became possible through computing power within the last decade. So we created it, right? So does it become a point where it becomes self-aware and is the creator? I don't know. But
like
I don't think it's, a bit. Or Blade Runner.
Right. Scary stuff.
Yeah. I don't think it's anytime soon, based on what Dr. Kaku said. But I do think it will have the capacity to do it in different ways, right? Help astronomy,
of course,
understand the universe because of its capacity to process so much data simultaneously.
So how, with all of this technology and all of these data points, and then the flip side of being a monk and living in a mountain somewhere, right? We all have different paths we're on here, right?
Yeah.
How do you remain humanized?
Great question. Well, I think the answer is, what is human? And I think at its core, some of the elements that are human are passion, creativity, emotion, the ability to feel pain as well as pleasure, the ability to understand what pain is telling us, right? The message our own body
it's the greatest teacher.
Is sending us, right? Don't do that anymore, right? Try not to do that. Maybe I shouldn't be drinking these sugary soft drinks because I'm putting on something I didn't have before, right? Your body is sending you a message. And I think human is that ability to, over a lifetime, think that way or allow the brain to develop that. And that's kind of a weird way to say it. But I think
I don't think it's a weird way. I think it makes sense.
I think that, we're longitudinal beings, right? We have a lifetime of learning. Correct. Inside of us, not a database that we just digested.
No, we carry our generational learning, not only the trauma,
absolutely.
The learning, right?
Yes.
And many believe, in various dialects and religions, we're in a moment of spiritual awakening right now, and that transition comes with fire, right? And whether that be in the wars or the disagreements or in the technology shifts, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, for me, it's just, I had a concern. I was looking at my nieces and nephews when they were younger, and they're all in med school now. And I was like, are they going to be talking to me in emojis one day and say like smiley face? Like, because they lost the aspect of being able to look each other in the eye and gauge people's emotions, which to me is what being human is about. It's about being able to sit across from someone, read their body language, whether it's business or personal, and be empathetic.
Yeah.
I don't know if a computer can be empathetic.
I not today. That's certainly the case. It can't be because it can't feel another's pain, right? It can't project in that matter. I can't speak to 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from hence, but certainly not today. And I think to your nieces and nephews, their children will grow up in a world where communication does change. We're just seeing an interim step with emojis, if you will.
Correct.
Right? But what that indicates is a higher degree of integration between physical communication, me talking to you right now, and digital communication, right? Sending an emoji to someone because what you just read about them was happy or sad.
Right. And also,
that will continue to evolve into ways that allow them to make sense of that world.
well, it also, the whole point of evolution and being able to communicate in empathy is being to have an active conversation, right?
Right.
So the other major difficulty here with AI and with the technology and the communication is everybody wants to take this extended pause in business and personal situations where, yes, like I had a situation the other day where I had to pause for 48 hours and not respond and let the information settle, which, you know, when I worked with you, was not something I was good at. I was very reactionary. And then the team came back to me and said, oh, well, you didn't even get back to us. I was like, you didn't want to hear what I was going to say to you on that day.
Yeah.
You know, I had that conversation yesterday, and that can be difficult, right? But the flip side of that is being able to sit here when discomfort comes and actually be able to play in and have the conversation with somebody and work through the discomfort.
Right.
So the data points can be concerning, I guess, and maybe this is more a statement than a question. The data points can be concerning because at what point can you just sit there and have a conversation with me and let's figure this out and how we look for resolution? The computer's not going to give us resolution.
Right. Well, I think that's true today. But again, I can't speak to 20 years from now to a different generation who grows, much like the digital natives have grown up with technology, and now it's completely integral with their life. 20 years from now, it would be projection to figure out what role would AI play in that conversation. So for example, maybe I'm wearing smart glasses, and while we're having a difficult conversation, it's giving me suggestions. I can ignore them, or I can use them.
That's interesting. You're saying actually giving you like like almost having a mentor in your eyes.
Yeah, or maybe it's reading my facial expression and it's saying, chill out.
Yeah.
You're too tense.
Take a breath.
You need to take a breath and calm down because you're saying things you don't mean.
Breathe.
Right? Like a good friend would do. If a good friend was sitting next to you, it's
and
like, just calm down a little bit.
That's very interesting about the idea of like a coach in the glasses, right? Because, you know, like I mentioned, I was blessed to have the mentors I have. But now with all these podcasts out there, you can choose your digital mentors. And there's so much information, you know, and I had someone say to me, well, you could listen to all these podcasts, but can you take in the information? I'm like, it's like music, man. Have it on in the background. If you retain 15 to 20% of it or pick up a soundbite here or there that's going to help you in a conversation, isn't that worthy of listening to it?
Exactly.
Rather than soap operas or anything else on TV?
Yeah, or background music playing, right?
Correct.
Now something that actually is beneficial to you, that it knows the appropriate time and the appropriate manner in which to share it with you.
Wild. Seems like it's all leading us towards spiritual enlightenment, though. At least that's what I hope.
Me too.
You know, for these energy perspectives. You know, we're about to round out our conversation. We have a few more minutes left here. Is there any project with the students that just in the last 12 months that you can speak to without betraying confidences?
Sure.
That was just like, wow, this is something that I can see revolutionize either the gaming space or the sports and entertainment space, something that was so, you know.
There have been several.
Amazing.
And I think what inspires me the most, it's not necessarily just the idea, it's the student. It's their ability to think through a problem and find an extremely novel solution that is, maybe you call it disruptive, you can call it whatever you want, but it indicates that they were looking at this from a very different perspective. And I had a student, she has a Ph.D. in the sciences, and she was looking at spirulina, live spirulina, right? And she educated me one afternoon on the benefits of this, and this was her project, and here were the things she was working on and the applications she was thinking about turning this into, right? Inspired me because of how she applied what she had learned into something that was going to make the world a better place. I had students who have been, working on, kind of fun things, very kind of dopamine drivers. A student, really, really clever young man named Ben, who was from Boston, who was working on an idea around sports betting. But it wasn't about how to get you to bet more. It was about understanding that most people who watch sports aren't going to do that. But there are things you can do that can enhance their enjoyment of the game without introducing that. right? Because A, they don't want to learn and they don't want to gamble. But maybe there are other things that they want to do with their friends to socialize the game more. You know, it was the way he was approaching the problem that got me.
I was laughing because I was thinking about the time we were transitioning the sports book to Cantor and we went to meet with them. And that was 2010. And to think they were putting that trading software in, and we were thinking that this was going to be the central hub, almost like how hedge funds, and now you can legally sports game in Florida.
That's right.
You know, it's the world's changing.
How
14 years.
Changed. Yeah. So that I think that's it. It's their how they think that impresses me the most. And just as I said earlier in the podcast, the percentage or the group of younger people who have this entrepreneurial drive within them, it's so significantly more than, I mean, this is going back decades. When I was in my undergrad, I don't know a single one of my friends who went down an entrepreneurial path.
We were also in in an industrial time, and then we went into the services industry in this country, and we've gone through all these transitions, and also survival mode. Most people are coming from survival mode and just need a paycheck to pay off loans, right? Well, Robert, it was so thankful you did this. I look at you as a friend, a mentor, a colleague. There's so many titles to our friendship, and I appreciate you. I wanted to leave the audience with just a thought here. We're at an inflection point in history. We have technology and capabilities to help the world heal and move the collective mindset from scarcity to abundance. The most important frequency to get us there is the frequency of love. The ability to connect to the divine source, cultivate this energy from within, and share it without the want of reciprocity from others, with the mindset of reaching higher frequencies as we instill it in the community at large. So thanks for joining us at Higher Frequencies. Looking forward to sharing more thoughts on development of self, business, spirituality, life, and we'll see you next time.